This recording talks about Step 7 of the UFE framework, which is part of the Week 2 series. The graphic organizer here shows the Steps 5, 6, and 7 that are being talked about in the Week 2 series. And here is Step 7 as shown as an integral part of the UFE evaluation process involving steps 1 through 6. And you can see that step 7 is in the middle because it really is all about focusing on and prioritizing evaluation questions. So there are questions that go along with each step of the UFE process in steps 1 through 7, which we'll talk about. So this step is focusing priority evaluation questions. This slide shows the types of questions that can be incorporated as part of step 7 on focusing evaluation questions. So in step 1, you talk about assessing the client's commitment to doing a useful evaluations. And here are 3 questions that can help you to determine that usefulness, because we all know that an effective UFE evaluation is one that creates findings that will be used. So one question would be, how would you assess if the program is ready for UFE? How did you determine the stakeholders? And what needs to be done and can be done to enhance readiness? Here are the questions that can be helpful for you to accomplish step 2 of the UFE process when you're trying to determine readiness and capability as an evaluation facilitator. So what is the match between your knowledge and what will be needed in the evaluation? What's the match with your commitment and the challenges to the evaluation? And what's the match with your skills and what will be needed for the evaluation? And are you prepared as an evaluation facilitator to have your effectiveness judged? Step 3 is a very simple question when you're identifying your primary intended users. Who are your primary intended users and why are they important in the process? Step 4, when you're determining situation analysis, contains several questions that will be helpful. As you look at these questions, you might want to share them with your primary intended users because that will help them focus their evaluation. So I won't read the questions to you, but you can see how they are all tied to determining the situation analysis of your UFE. Step 5 are questions that help you identify the primary intended uses of your evaluation, not the users of the evaluation, but the types of uses that we discussed earlier, having to do with the different types and purposes of evaluation. So for a formative evaluation, the question you would ask and discuss with your PIUs is, how might the evaluation contribute to program improvement? Here's a summative and decision-oriented question. How does it contribute to making major decisions about the program? Here's the knowledge-generating questions, lessons learned and evidence from evidence-based practices. How might the evaluation contribute to generating knowledge? And here is that process use question to build capacity of infusing evaluation throughout the organization. What might the process uses of evaluation be? On page 129, this is taking you all the way back to step number 5. Here are some good priority questions that can help focus. Remember all of the different types of evaluations that we talked about in step 5? So you have to remember when determining these priority questions, it's helping us get to a meaningful evaluation because meaningful evaluation answers begin with meaningful questions. And oftentimes, we as evaluation facilitators need help in determining what those questions might be for each type of evaluation. And here are the other two types of evaluation, monitoring and developmental evaluation. And here's knowledge generation evaluation and the questions associated with that. If you remembered, step 6, which we just discussed and you viewed the video prior to this particular video, was all about building in process uses. Remember, we can learn not only from evaluation findings, but the processes used in the evaluation we learned lots from. So step 6 involves working with the PIUs to identify questions that will yield both answers and action, making sure the questions are relevant, answerable, and actionable. And they're the questions that the PIUs want answered to guide future action. So always keeping the utilization-focused evaluation focused on the future and not dwelling on the past. Step 7, focusing in evaluation. When you're trying to determine those important questions, it's an interactive process between you as the evaluator and the PIUs of the evaluation. So you have to decide in collaboration with PIUs what will be evaluated, means deciding what will also not be evaluated. And that's where the prioritization comes in, with using questions to help focus your evaluation. So your evaluation needs to focus on the most critical issues or concerns, testing any assumptions. Remember, this is reality testing. So we're testing our assumptions. And then it also means discussing the undiscussables. So sometimes those unpleasant current reality kinds of things that we want to brush under the table, we need to discuss to help focus the evaluation. Page 172 includes some excellent criteria for your team to use to help you determine what questions should help guide or focus the evaluation. Because you can see just from the many questions that we've reviewed in class, there are hundreds of questions. So we have to focus on those questions that can be answered sufficiently to inform understanding and again guide future action. We also have to generate those questions where we can get answers in a reasonable time frame without an exorbitant cost. We also have to consider, number 3, the data that's involved with the questions and what's that going to look like, and is that going to be a complicated process or a simple process, but it's data that can be brought to bear on the questions and are aligned to the questions that we ask. And number 4, we have to make sure that the questions that we identify, the answers are not biased or predetermined. Or again, this is reality testing. These are not questions that the evaluator is answering, or for that matter, the primary intended users are answering, but it's all based on data. And of course, the questions that we've discussed before that the PIUs want answered, and they say they're important, and they have to be able to say why these questions are important. And again, we're focused on action. Intended users can indicate how they would use the answer to the question for future decision making and action. Pages 173 and 174 are questions that match each evaluation purpose. So these questions that you see are matching questions to each purpose. And again, it's working through these questions with your primary intended users. So when you meet with your primary intended users, make sure you pay attention to these questions that help you identify the purpose of your evaluation. And I think those are very helpful questions for you to use when you conduct your UFE process. Step 7 also involves, as you're thinking about your questions, it's really helping you form your evaluation design. And so you might come across some of these methods kinds of questions, but they should be selected and the evaluation designed to support and achieve the intended use by primary intended users. So you want to select the appropriate methods aligned to the questions being asked. Assure that the results obtained by the methods will be believable, credible, and valid, that the methods are practical, cost-effective, and ethical. And again, this focus on use. So if we're using these methods that we've identified through our questions with our primary intended users, we have to assure that these methods will be used. Page 179 talks about the IT questions. There really are 3 questions that are associated with that IT question. And you know, the IT question is one that we can all relate to when we think about how some of our stakeholders ask us to conduct evaluation. They always want to know if it is working, right? It being our programs. So the author talks about 3 types of questions. And certainly I relate to all of these questions with my educator experience, as I'm sure you do as well. But the implementation question often asked is, what happened in the program? Or the outcomes question, what resulted as a result of the program being implemented? And of course, the good old attribution question, can what resulted be attributed to what was implemented? This one is really difficult many times for educators to answer because we can't always isolate the variables that contributed to the implementation of the program, and that's where our challenges as evaluation facilitators and practitioners and leaders come, is that we can actually be able to determine what are the causes of the results that we're getting. So can what resulted be attributed to what was implemented? And of course, all of these questions have to do with the fidelity of implementation that we often get asked. And we often hear about people saying, well, the program was not implemented with fidelity. So were all program components implemented? And can we truly say that as a result of implementing those components of the program, that this contributed to the results, the positive results that we're seeing? If we have negative results, is it because of the IT questions that we see here? So something for all of us to think about and ponder. Pages 182 and 80 through 87 is menu 7.1, which are alternative ways of focusing the evaluation. So if you look at this page, you see the different types of evaluation, and this goes it goes beyond the 6 types of evaluation that we discussed earlier. So I encourage you to take a look at the many different types or focuses of various types of evaluation. And the author points out that all of these different types ask different questions and focus on different purposes. So this menu includes some sample defining questions or appropriate approaches that align to each of the focus areas and types of evaluation. So as you're looking at those, you might also reflect about the types of evaluations that were mentioned in the Auburn article that you just completed a journal article review on. And what types of evaluations do you recognize in your school district or workplace setting? And you might want to jot down some examples. As you look at pages 182 through 187, you might see some example evaluations in your particular setting. I'd also like to point out on our Google Drive under the Week 2 folder, I've loaded up some different types of evaluations that were done. There's an example in the Rockwood School District here in Missouri, as well as in Columbia. So you might want to determine what kind of evaluations those two examples are. I'd like to move in to the topic of our utilization-focused evaluation project. This is your Big Rock project, and it's due on week 6, and this is the rubric showing exactly how your project will be assessed with exemplary performance, proficient, and developing performance. There are really 5 different areas that we look at when evaluating your UFE project. We look at content, and you can see what defines content for exemplary, proficient, and developing. We also look at analysis and application. That includes your in-depth analysis, your interpretation, your judgment, and your recommendations. And I do want to go back to content. Really, what we're looking at with content is making sure that all 14 sections are included in your UFE project, which I'll show you that slide here in just a moment. We're also looking at style, thorough use of APA format. Your writing is clear, it's descriptive, it's well organized, and it's succinct. And then we're looking at mechanics. So I really encourage you to make sure that you proofread your paper, you have someone else proofread your paper for those mistakes that sometimes get in our way because we're too close to it and we just can't find them. So encourage you to take a look at that, because sometimes we lose points because of simple errors that could have been prevented. And then you'll also have an opportunity to do an oral presentation on week 6. So week 6, you'll turn in an electronic copy. You'll email me your paper of your UFE project, and then you'll also conduct a oral presentation of your UFE project. So what does this really look like? I've created an organizer. So when we talk about 14 sections, we talk about that 14th section being the executive summary, and then really the rest of it is just 13 parts of the UFE process that we've discussed in class. So there's program organizational readiness, evaluator readiness, there's identification of your primary users and why they're important, there's situation analysis, and be careful to know that section 5 below here is also step 4 talked about in your book of situation analysis. So really steps 4 and 5 are situation analysis. The second section is program and primary intended users' previous experience with program evaluation. Step 6 is identify the primary uses of the UFE, not the users, the uses, which means the different types of evaluation that we discussed. Is it a formative, is it a summative, or is it a developmental evaluation? Section 7 of your paper talks about the focus of your evaluation with the questions that you developed in collaboration with your primary intended users. Section 8 we'll be talking about more next week, which is methods and evaluation design. Step 9 or Section 9 is data collection. Section 10 is what is the process you use for data analysis. Sometimes people ask me what's the difference between Section 9 and Section 10. They're very similar, but data collection is really talking about the data. What data is it that you're collecting? And then Section 10 is what is the process you're going to use for data analysis? Is it going to be you as the evaluator analyzing all of that data, or is it going to be you in collaboration with your primary intended users? Results is also similar to Section 10, but results is what is it? What's your findings? What are the findings after you've analyzed the data? And Section 12 is how are you and the primary intended users, how are you going to use these results And then section 13 is your recommendations and a summary of those. And I suggest that once you get all of these 13 sections written, then you're in a better position to write an executive summary. An executive summary is just a brief summary of all 13 steps. For example, when you do your dissertation, you will have to write an abstract, which is really an executive summary of your dissertation. Again, your final project is due with your executive summary and sections 1 through 13 and your presentation due the 6th week. I'd like you for week 3 to begin your UFE project, where you might have even met with your primary intended users, where you've determined all of these things. Next week, kind of write down your progress with each of these steps. I don't expect you to have your paper written by then, but just a little bit of jotting down with where you are, with the type of program you're evaluating, the readiness to evaluate that program, your evaluator readiness, and I'd like to see a list of your primary intended users and why they're important in the process. And I'd like you to really talk about the situation analysis in step 4, and number 5, the program and the PIU's previous experience with program evaluation. All right, this is just a helpful slide that I put together. When you've completed steps 1 through 5, which is going all the way through situation analysis, really what's kind of the next step with steps 6 and 7? Well, determine the type of evaluation with your PIUs, what you would like to accomplish with the program evaluation, create a list of questions with the primary intended users, as far as what they would like to know about the program and its effectiveness. Then discuss with the primary intended users the methods for collecting the data needed to answer the questions. And then with your primary intended users, you'll eventually want to create a survey or a focus group questions that will assist in collecting the data. So for week 3, these are your assignments. Read pages 191 through 283, and we'll discuss steps 8 through 10 of the UFE framework. Again, I'm asking you to please jot down your thoughts regarding your program evaluation, steps 1 through 7. And then next week, I'd like to give you some work time in class for you to work on your projects. And if you'd like, you can go ahead and complete your review of the second journal article. It's in the week 4 folder. The review is due on week 4. So that explains next week's assignments. Thank you very much and have a wonderful week.